is called duo, that is not love, and the younger is called suo, that is love. So this is really a kind of philological work that he was trying to create. But on the other hand, De's prose is neat and elegant as the prose of any Victorian writer, which makes the philological, ethnological collection a pleasure for the reader. And I think it's no chance that Macmillan selected his book for a luxury edition illustrated by Warwick Goble, who interpreted the stories with his paintings, sometimes in the style of Mogul miniature. He drew at least an illustration for every story. His manner of painting may well be described as Orientalist today, but it testifies to the repute of the original work. So in those times before Said, his painting style was not deemed out of place in the original work, and I bet that the author would have been pleased if he could have seen what was done with his work. Now, Torvald. Torvald was an extraordinary girl. I don't know how many of you are acquainted with her work. She stemmed from an extraordinary family. Her father was Govind Chandra, himself a humanist and an essayist and a poet. And thanks to his open-mindedness, Toru and her sister Aru were the first Indian girls to study at a university abroad, in France first and then in England. They learned French and English, and Toru developed an inclination for romantic poetry, which she imitated in her book, Verses. In 1869, they visited Europe, including Italy, but stayed principally in France and England. And in Cambridge, they went to the newly established Girton College, which was the first college in Cambridge entirely devoted to women. Toru and the sister attended the high lectures for women and became friends with one Mary Martin, who would be the chief correspondent of Toru's epistolary. And as she came back to Calcutta after a couple of years, she felt plunged in a feverish dream of intellectual effort and imaginative production. In 1875, she took up Sanskrit together with her father, and she studied Sanskrit for at least 1.5 years, and she started translating from Sanskrit. When she died, soon after, her father became the editor of the works that she had left unfinished, and the Ancient Ballads and Legends of Hindustan is the outcome of this book. I would like to focus especially on her English rendition of Savitri in quatrains made of iambic tetrameters. I don't know if Pooja realized it, but her piece, which we saw yesterday on Sita and Draupadi, is very much in the same line inaugurated by Torvald in her rendition of Savitri. Both have interpreted the sacred mythological icon in modern terms, making a point for the present and for the future. And I could wish no better introduction to my paper. The story of Savitri was certainly known to Toru even before she read it in the Mahabharata, but many of the details that are found in her translation she had certainly taken directly from the Sanskrit original. However, I will focus mostly on the differences which are more interesting to us today. And the first difference is the way in which Savitri herself is described. Above all, Toru stresses Savitri's purity in these terms. Her charm was this: upon her face, childlike and innocent and fair, no man with thought impure or base could ever look. The glory there, the sweet simplicity and grace, avenged the boldest. But the good God's purity there, love to trace, mirrored in the dawning woman. Beside purity, Savitri is endowed with great freedom and agency. She apparently lived in a sort of Arcadian scenario where she would roam at her will. In those far-off primeval days, fair India's daughters were not pent in close bananas. On her ways, Savitri at her pleasure went, whither she chose, and hour by hour, with young companions of her age, she roamed the woods for fruit or flower, or loitered in some hermitage, for the moon is grey and old, her presence was as sunshine glad, they taught her wonders manifold and gave her the best they had. Thus, her purity transcends mere physical chastity and includes her emotional and intellectual attitude. Emotional chastity is a most interesting insight of Taurus because it implies an emotional intelligence which was not valued as such in the 19th century, and it perhaps is still underestimated today. In one of her roamings, she espies Satyavan and falls in love with him at first sight. Once at home, she duly consults her mother and her father for permission to marry the young man. Incidentally, Satyavan is not consulted, at least not in this text. Her father asks Narad Muni if the horoscopes match, and Narad Muni advises her against marrying Satyavan because he has only one more year to live. Here, Savitri asserts her spirit once more. She considers love as the gift of the gods, and hence she rejects the Muni's suggestion not to marry Satyavan. Because it is not fair, she says, to avoid what the fate has in store for us with Kami. And this is also interesting because her father depicts very vividly the hardships and the injustice of the life of a widow. And nevertheless, Toru accepts what seems to be her doom. Once and once only I have given my heart and faith, 'tis past recall. With conscience none have ever striven, and none may strive without a fall. Not the less solemn was my vow because unheard, and oh, the sin will not be less if I should now deny the feeling felt within. Unwedded to my dying day, I must, my father dear, remain. 'Tis well, so thou willst, but say, can man both fade or break its chain? So, if fate so rules that I should feel the miseries of a widow's life, can man's device the doom repeal? So, this is how she argues against her own father. Another point where Toru's Savitri diverges from the original is in the encounter with Yama. In the original Sanskrit, according to Pandits, I cannot read Sanskrit myself, Toru proves wiser or more cunning than Yama, and thus obtains her husband back. In Toru's version, Savitri never tries to deceive Yama. While in the original she asks for the boon of 100 children born from Satyavan and herself, thus implicitly obliging Yama to give back the husband's life, in Toru's version, Yama himself is moved by Toru's righteousness and determination, and he willingly omits to put any condition to her boon. And so, eventually, Savitri asks, he says, Savitri asked and asked unblamed. So she was free to ask whatever she wanted. She took the clue, felt death was love, for no exceptions now he named. So he didn't make an exception. Yama had granted 2 boons earlier, and the 2 boons were, you can ask whatever you want, but your husband. But the 3rd time, he makes no exception. And so she says, thou knowest, Lord, the innermost hearts and thoughts of all. There is no need to utter word. Upon thy mercy so I call. In sum, Toru's translation is very different from the philological translations offered by Dal Bihari Dey. His translation followed a well-determined program of cultural politics. He aimed at bringing European and Asian art to a par. Toruda, more simply and more ambitiously, is trying to interpret the myth, adapting it to a more modern sensibility, and claiming women's rights in her own 19th century way. Her cultural program includes a different, more liberal attitude towards women and a different interpretation of devotion, both conjugal and religious devotion. Conjugal because Savitri deliberately chooses her husband, selecting him herself as the worthiest of men despite the impending risk and despite her parents. And religious because she wins Yama's heart through her wisdom and meekness. The intended readers of Dal Bihari Dey's translation are mostly Europeans. The intended readers of Toru's are simply kindred spirits, whether European or Indians. Indeed, even those who already know Sanskrit may be interested in her rendition of the myth. Now, turning to Amitabh Ghosh's translation of the legend of Bonbibi, this is very similar in many ways in its motivations to the work that Toru Dutt did. Now, in his great derangement, Ghosh complained that the so-called serious novel appears inadequate to represent non-human agents. Twin brother of rationalism, the realistic novel is mostly unable to depict whatever reality is not sanctioned in the rationalist, scientific, originally Western discourse. Ghosh wonders why it is difficult for serious realistic fiction to deal with climate change. His reasoning is comparatively well known and very articulated. Suffice to recall here that one possible answer to this question about the irrepresentability of climate change depends on its uniqueness. It has never happened before, and it's difficult to imagine that it happens in the future. Novels, Ghosh contends, are perceived as realistic not so much because of the truth of what they describe, but because of the probability of the incidents they describe. So when they present an unprecedented event, they appear flawed, no matter how possible that event can be. And in The Great Derangement, Ghosh alleges that he has never been able to utilize in his fiction, an extreme weather event that he experienced in Delhi as a young man, because it was so unique that it would have sounded improbable in any works of fiction, but he's telling the same thing in the essay, and in the essay he's utilizing that, and it is credible in the essay. So there must be something with the novel, Ghosh concludes, that's not quite work. 2 years later, he published Gun Island, which explores the connection between climate change and migration, relying on the Bengali myth of Manasa Devi as a subtext. Gun Island clearly testifies to Ghosh's impatience with the conventions of serious fiction, both on an artistic and on a political level. On the artistic level, Ghosh bends the rules of statistical probability almost to a breaking point, mostly through coincidences that may happen but rarely in real life. On the political level, he indicts the epistemic tyranny of rationalism. Let me say again, epistemic tyranny of rationalism, by offering interpretations and worldviews that challenge the Western rationalist discourse. After Gun Island, Ghosh pushes his experimentation even farther with Jungle Nama, a story of the Sundarban. Interestingly, it's Sundarban in the singular, as they tell me it is in Bangla, whereas in the Hungry Tide and in Gun Island, he always written Sundarbans in the plural. The author becomes even more radical as he decides to do away with the realistic medium and tell the story of Bonbibi. Bonbibi, of course, meant the Lady of the Forest, a founding myth of the Sundarban people. Interestingly, a prose translation of Bonbibi's legend filled one whole chapter in the Hungry Time, but reads and that novel, reads like a poetical encyclopedia of the Sundarban, and therefore it had to be there. And the realistic trick is that one character has translated part of Bonbibi's story as a letter within the novel. So that's why we have it there. But this way of incorporating the story in the novel to make it realistic is typically secular and typically novelistic and typically rational. Both the goddess worshippers and the story itself are mentioned, as it were, within inverted commas, and offer the benevolent secular rationalistic gaze of world readers as an anthropological curiosity. The twists in the legend's plot and the narrative ingenuity are there to be marveled at, but not really shared by the secular middle class intended for this novel. For whom this novel is intended, sorry. 17 years later, Ghosh boldly abandons the inverted commas and the realistic mode of representation and offers an illuminated rendition in verse. While in The Hungry Tide he showcased the story of Bonbibi, in Jungle Nama he endorses the story. Arguably, this aesthetic decision amounts to a political choice that is the equivalent of the boycott campaign. For his rendition, Ghosh adopted an English adaptation of the Dwadi Poyar, the Bengali folk meter of 12-syllable couplets. Duke's mother, Duke is the boy who is the protagonist of the story. His mother describes the meter in this way. The Dwipodi Poyar will give your voice wings. It's the meter of wonder. Its cadence will strengthen your words. They gain in power. It will work its magic by tying your thoughts together into couplets of 24 syllables. That sometimes rhyme, sometimes use half-rhyme vocals. The discipline required by rhyming is itself a kind of tapa, let's say, that enhances the supplicant's playing and binds him to the goddess. The story recounts the adventure of Dona, a greedy merchant who goes into the forest of Dokin Rai, the tiger demon, to collect honey and wood with a disproportionate number of shields. The demon appears to him in a dream and grants him the valuable merchandise, provided that he gives him his teenage nephew, Duque, for his prey. Dona accepts the deal and sails back home, leaving the boy to his destiny. When Duque believes he is lost, he remembers that his mother told him to pray Bon Bibi in case he was in trouble. Although frightened, he finds the right meter and the right words to summon the goddess. And at that point, the goddess brothers, the goddess brothers, Shah Goli, beats Dokin Rai, and the boy goes home astride a crocodile laden with gifts. As he arrives, he marries, he gets married with a girl, which in some versions is indeed Dona's daughter. In his rendition, Ghosh foregrounds three details: Dona's greed, Duque's discipline, and Bon Bibi's equanimity. While in the original story, Dona decides to sacrifice his nephew in cold blood, in Ghosh's story he only accepts the deal when he's told that if he does not, his entire crew will be lost. Dona apparently is blackmailed by the demon. And Dona's violence is not directed primarily at the boy, but at nature. His greed is the cause of everything. Initially, greed appears as harmless, but eventually it turns out to be destructive. Duque, the boy, though not significantly wise himself, is rewarded for his piety and his discipline, his wisdom consisting chiefly in knowing his own limits. His mother is very particular in telling him that he must invoke Bon Bibi with the right meter. After winning her battle, Bon Bibi asks Duque to forgive the uncle, while she does not slay the tiger demon, but on the contrary assigns the demon a portion of the forest where he can be king. So the former anthropological curiosity has become a lesson, not in anthropology, but in ecological wisdom. The Nama exposes global readers to a different culture, a different way of writing and thinking, and asks them to subscribe to it. Ghosh does not expound upon the causes or effects of climate change, but brings his reader back to the point where rationalist discourse and poetical natural discourses diverge, marking the necessity to think differently and keep native lore. This change of paradigm calls for a medium other than the prose of rationalism and scientific discourses, although the myth describes the king Rai in the guise of a tiger and Bon Bibi in that of benevolent servant deity. Ghosh's attention is on the agency and of the non-human and the way it communicates in non-human languages. Ghosh sums up the message of the myth in the closing lines of the poem. All you need to do is be content with what you've got. To be always craving more is the demon's lot. A word of endless appetite is a word possessed, is what your Munshi learned by way of his quest. So the Munshi is actually the narrator in this case, that is Ghosh himself. And in the afterword, Ghosh is quite explicit about the interpretation for the poem. The planetary crisis, he writes, has upturned a vast range of accustomed beliefs and expectations, among them many that pertain to literature and literary forms. In the before times, stories like this one would have been considered childlike and thus fair for children. But today, it is increasingly clear that such stories are founded on a better understanding of the human predicament than many narratives that are considered serious and adult. The story of Bon Bibi does not exist solely as a printed text. As the readers of the Hungry Tide know, bright-colored Bon Bibi terracotta images are to be found all over the Sundarbans. And the story is often enacted as jatra, a kind of folk theatre typical of Bengal. Like Toru Dutt's ballads, the text of Jungle Nama is not exactly a poem, but a free rendition of the original. And the story is aimed at an international audience. This volume is also illuminated, that is illustrated, but Bond uses this word, by the works of Salman Tour, a Pakistani artist based in New York. However, the book also has another avatar in the audiobook, which Ghosh realized with Ali Sethi. You must know Ali Sethi for its Pazuri, perhaps, which was a chart topper. Ali Sethi added background music and short refrains that highlight some moments in the narrative, like a Greek chorus. Now, to make an example of this. So this is how Ali Sethi created the thing.
At dawn, Hona announced, "It's come time to depart. Men, take 6 of our ships and make an early start. I will come in the 7th, alone with Dukhi. That way he'll learn more. I have much to teach him today." On hearing these words, a tremor went through the boy. "Why just me?" he thought. "This must be some fiendish ploy." Aloud he said, "Chacha, why do you want only me? It doesn't make sense. I don't understand this decree. Why should I remain here while the others go on? Is there something I don't know? Some hidden reason? Why only me, Chacha? Why only me? Why am I the only one? Why am I the only one? A demonic ploy? Is that some demonic ploy? Or is there a hidden reason? Or is there a hidden reason?"
Okay, so this is the way the text has been interpreted, and Ghosh was very proud of this audiobook rendition of his own text. Let me go back to the PowerPoint. Okay. And last but not least, this same text has been made into another. I just want to show you a few other tables. And we don't have the time to comment on all of them. They're very interesting. Salman Tour usually depicts completely different drawings, and he's very particular about faces. But both he and Ghosh decided not to have faces painted, not to offend Islam readers. And so there are no faces throughout the thing. And that's interesting because you see how he has conveyed this troublesome situation, the predicament of these people in the jungle through the movement of the bodies. And here you see these are the Laskars, these are the people in the Sundarbans collecting honey, and the kid eyes watching them. As I said, there's another avatar. The whole story has been made into a musical project, using the text and using, of course, Ali Sethi's music. And I would like to close by showing a short clip of what has been made of it. This is it. Lascars going to the Sundarbans.
One go! Into the jungle we must go.
And this is Dona.
Richard, I'll lead.
And this is where they are lost in the maze of the Sundarbans.